The Turkish government is being criticised following the country's worst ever industrial disaster. A national strike has been called by 4 unions. But why is the government being blamed? And could the tragedy have been averted? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mike Hanna. Desperate rescue attempts continue as the death toll in Turkey's worst mining disaster rises to more than 280. And as the country began 3 days of mourning, anger erupted. Prime Minister Receb Tayyib Erdogan was booed at by mourners during his visit to Soma on Wednesday.
All over this area, the grief is intensifying. So many young lives lost doing a job that's poorly paid. Julia Uzkoch had encouraged her 25-year-old husband to find work elsewhere. He was only a few weeks away from becoming a sergeant in the army. They married 7 months ago. They had big plans for the future. All over this town, there are gatherings like this. Soma is a town consumed by grief. And now the underlying anger is beginning to show more and more. Some of the anger is subdued, a feeling of social injustice that such high risks should be taken to earn a living.
We're very worried. They don't have a safe, secure job. We send them to work every day, but we don't know if they'll make it back.
He was like my own son. He grew up with me. My inside is on fire. We complain about safety standards, but they don't care.
Elsewhere in the town, the anger is spontaneous but not physical. These are mostly miners, some now retired, many still working. They say safety standards have suffered since mine privatization in 2005.
Before the privatization, it was very good, but now they don't value people's lives. They just want to get coal out and the money in.
In Soma town, no one here is counting numbers as the seemingly continuous list of victims is read out over the municipality's public address system. This town that's dependent on coal mining, that supplies its thermal power station, is seething with emotion over the safety question. Whether this will all have political impact on the government is at this stage unclear.
Well, mining safety in Turkey was on the political agenda even before Tuesday's disaster, and its track record is not a good one. Since 2000, it's estimated that 1,308 people have died in the industry. About 13,000 miners were involved in accidents last year. And more than 10% of all work-related accidents in Turkey happen in the mines, most of them in coal mines. So why is there so little safety in an industry that is worth almost $2.5 billion to the Turkish economy and that provides more than 90,000 people with work? Privatization of the mining industry is one reason given. Labour unions accuse private companies of failing to invest enough in the safety of their workers in favour of larger profit margins. Turkey has also failed to ratify the International Labour Organization Convention on Mining. And Erdogan's government has repeatedly rejected opposition calls for an inspection of coal mines in the country. Well, let's bring in our guests, and all of them join us from Istanbul. Ayhan Akaya is one of the union organizers who's been on strike. He represents the Education and Science Union and is also a political science researcher at Boğaziçi University. Ilter Turan is Professor Emeritus at International Relations at Istanbul Bilgi University. And Hüseyin Ekrem Cüneydoğlu is a research associate at Özyeğin University who wrote a report 2 years ago criticizing the coal mines in Turkey. Welcome to you all. Let's begin with Ayhan Akaya. The reaction of labour unions exceedingly angry, to say the least, is it not?
Yes, labor unions and trade union federations go out on strike today, and they try to walk social security center in Istanbul, but police didn't let them walk and demonstrate. Then they walk towards Mecidiyeköy Square, which is another important square in Istanbul, and after the press talk, they leave leave the space after 12 or 1 p.m.
Well,
today.
Ekrem Cüneytoglu, what is your initial reaction? You were the person who wrote a report 2 years ago, or one of the people who wrote a report warning of the potential problems within the mining industry. Tragically, it has come to fruition.
Yeah, actually, we published this report to increase awareness of the society about this important issue. But after 4 years of the publishment of the report, we faced with this new disaster, and actually it's really a big pain for our society. And first of all, I want to say sorry for our losses. The main thing about this issue is the lack of fitness between the policy making and policy implementation from our point of view. The government promulgated an occupational health and safety law in 2013, but this disaster, the Soma disaster, shows us that there are some problems at the implementation process, and what we need to do is focusing on this implementation insufficiencies.
Ilter Turan, what is your reaction to this disaster?
Well, this has been a long period of negligence, not necessarily confined only to this government, but a sequence of Turkish governments have been more concerned about essentially increasing productivity, increasing production, and at the same time, sometimes even increasing the wages of workers, but the security dimension has historically been treated rather lightly, and we are paying dearly for it. Of course, this is one of the dearest ways we have paid for such negligence.
Well, Ekrem Cüneytoglu, an important point that was brought up there is that it is not just the current government that has not acted the way it perhaps should have, but it has been an ongoing problem with subsequent governments within Turkey. So this is a long-standing issue, is it not, the question of safety on mines?
Yeah, actually, our report published in 2010, and in this report we compared the performance of Turkey compared to China and the United States since 1991, and there was a obvious problem in Turkey compared to US and China, especially at the fatalities per million tons of production. This was maybe the most important finding of the report. Even though China makes in terms of production 50 times of Turkey, when you look to the fatalities, Turkey is five times larger than China. And you know that China is at the focus of the world in terms of this labor market conditions, and Turkey is worse than China at mining fatalities. If we want to reach our 2023 goals before economic development, maybe we can look or we can focus on these social conditions or working environment conditions.
Well, Ayana Kaya, the union movement has been protesting for a period of time about the issue of safety. It is not this tragedy, just this tragedy, that has caused the workers, miners in particular, to express concerns. Do you feel that there has just been a deaf ear turned to the miners in particular, following their consistent warnings that there is going to be yet another tragedy?
Yes, trade unions actually demonstrating and striking against the subcontract law that has passed under the working law, a change of working law in 2006. Working unions think that one of the main reasons of this tragic accident is subcontracting law and widespread expansion of the subcontracting companies, generally in all sectors and specifically in the mining sector, and they need the abolishment of subcontracting law changes that has legislated in 2006. And their another demand is deprivatization of dangerous sectors like mining sector, because they think that profit maximizing tendency led this kind of a big tragedy.
We're speaking about the privatization of mines, the subcontracting of certain aspects of mine operations, and you and the unions feel that this has not been properly regulated. Is that your point?
Yeah, both the privatization process, it has some vague points that hasn't done properly and practiced properly, and subcontractual working in mining sector led together parallel with the informal sector, which is another chronic problem of Turkish economy, work together, actually, we can say, to happen in a mine such an accident. So that's the stance of the trade unions right now.
Well, Ilter Turan, the Prime Minister was booed by a large amount of the crowd when he actually went to the site of this particular tragedy. Clearly, there is going to be a political component to all of this impacting on the current government. Do you see that?
Well, clearly, apparently the Prime Minister, in a rather trying attempt to persuade people that these things happen, mobilized evidence from other countries in the 19th and early 20th centuries to make the current accident appear to be an ordinary risk that is associated with mining. And of course, this has completely alienated the people, because they felt that the Prime Minister did not empathize with them and essentially mobilized rather unpersuasive evidence to sort of justify or explain what had happened. I think this is coming on top of other allegations, and these outcomes, such as these accidents, lend more credence to the allegations that some sort of lack of oversight deriving from maybe corrupt practices is as much responsible for this as anything else. So we have forgotten to mention this is not the only field. I mean, because the numbers are great, it's receiving a lot of attention, but there has been, for example, a steady loss of lives in shipbuilding for similar reasons of negligence. So this is a broader program or problem, and I think it's going to have political repercussions that the Prime Minister will find difficult to make people forget this particular incident unless he engages in drastic action to make up for this lack of security in mining and other areas of working life.
Ekrem Cüneytoglu, just to return to the report that we've mentioned on a couple of occasions now, comparing the deaths per every million tons in the world's largest coal producers, which are the US and China, and of course Turkey. As you mentioned, Turkey's fatality rate is far, far higher than those countries. But China began reorganizing its coal mining industry, its mining industry, in 2004. It is already producing results. The US instituted new mining regulations and oversight way back in the 1940s. So clearly there's a correlation between a proper regulatory authority and investigation of a mining system and the number of people who die while mining. Why has Turkey been so slow to implement some kind of investigation or more stringent measures concerning mining safety?
Definitely you are right, especially when you look to the performance of China. The number of fatalities in coal mines in 2002 in China was approximately 7,000. And when we look to the 2013, the number is close to 1,000. This is a 6,000 decrease, and we can say a huge progress for this. And what they did, they closed the small mines, the first thing, and they changed their production process to more technology intensive. They started to use the recent technology in their mines. And in the literature, there are some findings about the high correlation between decreasing numbers of fatalities and increasing at the technology level used in the mines. So the first thing that we need to use, changing our production techniques, it can be. The second is, like it is mentioned before, changing the objective of the firms. We also mentioned this in our report. When you compare the fatalities in state-owned enterprises and private firms, the fatalities in private-owned mines were higher than the public ones. The reason is the difference at the objective. When we look to the US, there are some good cases that shows that increasing or maximizing the profit and minimizing the fatality incidents are not exclusive. Especially the best case can be is the Arch coal company in US succeeded to decrease the number of fatalities at 70% over the last 10 years. And what they did is they put to their objective, to their first objective, the goal of 0 incidents. And it shows us that it is possible to change the behavior of the firms. And the second is the education and experience gap between the developed nations and developing countries. When we look to the labor side of this accident, there are some problems, especially from the education point of view. We have to increase some educational activities to also get awareness among the workers, the second thing. And thirdly, there are some technological issues, especially about the methane drainage and deficiency or insufficiency insufficiency of scintillation plants.
Well,
These are some technical
if I
issues.
may go to Jan Kaya on this particular point, picking up on a number of things you mentioned, who do the unions essentially hold responsible for tragedies like this? We've heard mentioned too as well that although the numbers are vast in this particular tragedy, this is not an isolated incident. The mining industry is not an isolated industry in terms of workplace accidents. Who do the unions hold responsible? Is it the government because it is unable to regulate properly? Or is it in fact the private companies who run the shipyards and who run the mines?
Actually, there is a two-wing issue here, and the government is guilty because maybe you know, since the 2002 when the Justice and Development Party came to power, since that day till today, more than 12,000 people have died due to work accident, and we call it actually class murder. And government hasn't done anything against private companies, and there wasn't any judicial trial. No one has been sued due to these murders. And secondly, of course, the private companies that hasn't investing on infrastructures, on about the working safety, is the second guilty aspect of the issue, I think. So private companies haven't been investigated and surveilled by the government, then they act freely and they do not feel guilty about these murders.
Well, Ilta Turan, picking up again on the political aspects, the political fallout of this particular thing. Now, we're looking at those who've been tragically killed, for example, generally poorly paid workers living in rural areas. This is essentially the hotbed of Erdogan's supporters. Recent local elections showed the AK party does very strongly in rural areas, does very strongly among the poor voters, yet it is from this demographic that the most fatalities occur in this disaster and in other workplace incidents. Is this going to erode at what has been a constant base of support for the Prime Minister and his party?
Well, that remains to be seen. I mean, actually, of course, the most vocal critiques of the Prime Minister have been circles that have been traditionally critical of him. But with incidents like these, it is expected that the circle of people that are critical of government policies is going to increase. And I think this may prove to be a triggering event for people to take a more critical look at policies that are being implemented by the government, which aims to increase production, but in the process ends up also enriching people and not necessarily improving the welfare of the poor rural people. It remains to be seen, because essentially people sometimes treat these things as inevitable fatalities, and we don't know whether they're going to do that now or not.
Well, Ekrem Cüneyt, is this a consequence of Turkey's massive economic development? It's a decade in which the economy has developed very, very quickly indeed. It's a decade in which Turkey has become an economic power to be reckoned with. Has this been at the cost of individual safety, the safety and the sanctity of human life?
Actually, it's arguable, but if we're speaking about a healthy development process, it is not the case. The healthy development must take into account also the social side, not just the economic side. Okay, economically we are developing and we are changing our economic structure from, let's say, from manufacturing to services. This can be called as a second stage of the development. But on the other hand, we have to decrease the social capital too, or the social conditions, like the working conditions of these miners, and or is the same for the other sectors too. I think, from my point of view, this is not the case. We cannot say that if Turkey is developing and or want to develop, it can. This kind of fatalities are inevitable. This is not the case. We have to increase our working conditions too. This is my point of view.
Well, Ilter Turan, we know as well that of Turkey desperate to become a member of the EU. Now, the EU has mining regulations as well, to which Turkey has not subscribed. There appears to be a willingness to be part of the greater whole, and yet an unwillingness to follow certain things, such as restrictions on the mining industry as outlined by the EU and indeed by the ILO. Is this a problem within the Turkish attitude, within particularly this government's attitude to the outside world? Is Turkey reluctant to sign on to these strictures because it feels it is interfering with its own sovereignty?
Yes, in fact, Turkey has demonstrated a general unwillingness to subscribe to international conventions. And the ILO convention that you have referred to about mining safety is also one which Turkey has failed to sign. And of course, the ILO convention covers a broader group of countries than the EU. I think in the case of the EU, this particular chapter on labor relations has not yet been opened and negotiated about. So Turkey feels somewhat less constrained to pay attention to the EU regulations on that account. But certainly it is the reluctance, overall reluctance, to subscribe to international regulations for fear that it narrows the scope of activity of government too much that Turkey has failed to sign this agreement. And I think now the current situation may in fact encourage the Turkish government to reconsider its position.
Well, at that particular point, my thanks to our guests, Jan Akaya, Ilter Turan, and Ekrem Cüneyt. And you can follow this discussion online at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story or tweet us using @AJ Inside Story. I'm Mike Hanna. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.